Welcome to the debate. Today, we are confronting what is arguably the most profound and really the most persistent existential challenge in human history. We are looking squarely at the tension between the very visceral reality of human suffering and the concept of divine providence.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate philosophical roadblock. I mean, anyone who genuinely looks at the state of the world has to grapple with this at some point.
Exactly. And we're framing this discussion around a very specific historic controversy found in our source material. On one hand, we have the Epicurean Paradox. This is the classical philosophical formulation that questions the logical possibility of an all-powerful, all-merciful God existing in a world that is just saturated with immense suffering.
Right. And on the other hand, we are examining the highly structured Islamic theological framework. This is a system that views earthly existence not as a chaotic sequence of random tragedies, but as a deliberate, purposefully designed divine test.
Right. So I will be defending the perspective that human suffering, the existence of free will, and our complex moral struggles actually fit cohesively and logically within the infinite wisdom of a creator.
And I'll be taking the opposing position. I argue that the sheer, staggering scale of natural and moral evil we witness, the suffering that basically permeates the very fabric of our world, renders the concept of a benevolent, omnipotent designer logically contradictory.
To start us off, let's lay out the foundations of our respective positions on this incredibly difficult issue. How do you construct the initial problem?
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why the premise of divine mercy fundamentally clashes with observable reality. Let's get straight to the point without any philosophical buffer here. The world we live in is filled to the brim with suffering that defies any rational justification of benevolence.
You're talking about the raw scale of it.
The scale and the sheer indiscriminacy of it. We are talking about children starving to death by the millions. We are talking about natural disasters that wipe out entire cities in a matter of minutes, leaving generations traumatized. We are talking about diseases like cancer that ravage the innocent and the guilty alike. This is where the Epicurean paradox becomes absolutely inescapable.
The logical trap of power versus mercy.
Precisely. If there is a God who is all-powerful and all-merciful, why does he allow this to happen? The formulation is perfect. If God can stop this immense suffering and chooses not to, he is not merciful. If he wants to stop it but cannot, he is not all-powerful. Therefore, the profound suffering we see is not a mere glitch in an otherwise perfect system. It is compelling, empirical proof that the system itself has no divine benevolent designer.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective, one that challenges the core assumption embedded in your formulation. The paradox you presented is profound, and frankly, it is a question that every single believer must confront with utter seriousness.
But the paradox holds, doesn't it? It forces a choice between power and goodness.
It only holds if we accept a massive epistemological assumption. Your paradox assumes that we, as human beings with incredibly limited sight, bound by time and space, can accurately and comprehensively judge the infinite wisdom of a creator.
So the defense is just that we aren't smart enough to understand the designer's motives?
It's deeper than that. In the Islamic theological framework, we approach this by entirely reframing the purpose of existence. We believe that this earthly life is not the final destination. It is not meant to be a flawless paradise. Rather, it is a bridge. It is an arena of examination.
An examination. A test.
Exactly. When you look at the Islamic framework, there's a really profound framing in the Quran, specifically in chapter 67, Surah Al-Mulk. It explicitly says that life and death were created in order to test which of you is best in deeds. You look at the hardship in the world and view it as a system failure, a paradox that disproves the designer. This theological structure views it as a fundamental, defining feature of a temporary test. It's a rigorous crucible designed to reveal the true nature of our souls.
Okay, I understand the concept of a test. But let's look at the parameters of that test. Why must it be so incredibly brutal? That is the crux of the issue. If God is the ultimate designer, the grand architect of this universe, he sets the parameters. He wrote the rules.
He did. and the rules involve genuine stakes.
But why those specific rules? Why couldn't a supposedly merciful designer create a world where human beings possess free will but are fundamentally biologically programmed to be naturally empathetic, cooperative, and peaceful? We see flashes of that in human nature, so we know it's biologically possible to be naturally good.
But if you're programmed to be good, are you actually exercising free will?
You could have the choice to do minor wrongs, perhaps, but the overwhelming presence of massive moral evils, the endless wars throughout history, the systemic greed that starves nations, the deliberate cruelty we inflict on each other, it suggests something entirely different. If there is a designer who created a system where humanity routinely slaughters itself, that designer appears to be completely indifferent to our plight. A truly benevolent architect would not build a house where the inhabitants are practically guaranteed to set it on fire.
That's an interesting point, though I would frame it differently, specifically regarding what constitutes genuine virtue. Think deeply about the nature of goodness. What is the actual intrinsic value of goodness if you are essentially forced, or as you said, programmed to be good?
I would argue a programmed world with zero murder is vastly superior to a free will world with millions of casualties.
From a perspective of pure harm reduction, maybe. But let's consider the metaphor of a programmed robot. If I build a machine and write a line of code that forces it to say, "I love you," those words hold absolutely no emotional, moral, or relational value. The robot has no choice but to say it.
Sure, but a robot also doesn't feel pain when another robot attacks it.
True.
But for virtues like genuine love, profound bravery, and true moral integrity to exist in any meaningful way in conscious beings, the absolute possibility of their opposites must also exist. You cannot have courage without the presence of real danger. You cannot have true charity without the existence of greed and scarcity.
So the suffering is just the necessary dark backdrop to make human virtues look brighter?
Not just the backdrop, it's the mechanism of agency. In Islam, this concept is tied to Ikhtiyar, or free will. It is considered a remarkably heavy, sacred trust. The Quran illustrates the gravity of this in Surah Al-Ahzab, chapter 33. It notes that the heavens and the earth and the mountains were offered this trust of free will, and they declined to bear it. They were afraid of it, but humanity undertook it.
We accepted the risk of being able to choose evil? Yes. Humanity accepted this immense responsibility. Therefore, the moral evil committed by human beings, the wars, the corruption, the cruelty, is a result of human beings abusing this sacred, heavy gift. It is an indictment of human choices. It is not a flaw in the Creator's design. The test requires real, devastating stakes to be a valid test.
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered how completely it fails to address a massive portion of the suffering on this planet?
You're pivoting to natural evils.
I have to. I will concede, for the sake of intellectual exploration, your argument regarding free will and human-caused evil. We can attribute war and corruption to the abuse of human agency, but that leaves us with an enormous gap. Explain earthquakes, explain tsunamis that wash away entire coastlines, explain pediatric bone cancer or global viral pandemics.
Those are the hardest things to reconcile, without a doubt.
Because these phenomena are entirely divorced from human moral choice. No amount of human free will causes tectonic plates to shift and crush a sleeping family. How does an all-merciful God justify an earthquake that kills thousands of innocent people, including infants in their sleep? You cannot point to the abuse of human free will to explain the agonizing death of a child from a naturally occurring disease.
You are entirely right that human free will doesn't move tectonic plates. This is exactly where our perspectives diverge on the nature of ultimate knowledge and perception. I want to use the analogy of a single movie frame versus the entire film.
Okay, I'm listening.
When an earthquake strikes or an illness takes a life, you are looking at a single, isolated, deeply tragic frame of a vast, sweeping narrative. You judge the entire film and the director of that film by that one localized frame. The creator, however, possesses the script, sees the entire film, and understands the ultimate eternal resolution of every single character involved.
But an analogy only goes so far. A movie frame of a tragedy is still a tragedy.
Let me offer a more visceral metaphor that clarifies this dynamic. Imagine a small child standing in a hospital, watching a surgeon physically cut open a patient's stomach. To that child, who lacks any medical understanding, what the surgeon is doing looks like a horrific, brutal crime. It is pure violence.
Right.
But to someone with medical knowledge, it is a necessary life-saving surgery. We, in our relation to the divine, are exactly like that child. We see the cut, the immediate pain and destruction of the earthquake or the disease. We do not, and often cannot see the cure or the ultimate cosmic wisdom behind it.
Right, but the glaring difference in your analogy is that the doctor wakes the patient up afterward and explains the surgery. In natural disasters, people just die. There is no waking up to an explanation. The child's confusion doesn't matter because the patient is gone.
Which is exactly why the concept of an afterlife, specifically the Day of Judgment, is functionally necessary for this Islamic framework to hold together. If death is the absolute end, your critique holds perfectly. The surgery analogy fails. But in this theological structure, they do wake up. The Quran anchors this exact epistemological humility in Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2. It states, "Perhaps you hate a thing, and it is good for you, and perhaps you love a thing, and it is bad for you. And Allah knows, while you know not."
I come at it from a different way, because quite frankly, that sounds like a philosophical trap designed to insulate the concept of God from any real criticism.
How is it a trap? It's an acknowledgement of our cognitive limits.
Because it creates an unfalsifiable position. If something good happens, God is merciful. If something horrific happens, God is still merciful. We just can't understand it. If we cannot understand God's actions, then we cannot meaningfully call him good or merciful either, because those words lose all definition.
We call him merciful based on the broader provisions of existence, the guidance sent, and the ultimate promise of justice, not on our ability to micromanage his universe.
Furthermore, this underlying idea that we need a divine framework to understand morality or goodness is simply outdated. Evolutionary biology perfectly explains human kindness and morality without requiring any divine revelation or hidden cosmic wisdom.
You're talking about reciprocal altruism.
Tribal groups. Empathy and cooperation are biological imperatives that allowed a fragile species to survive in a hostile world. It's evolutionary biology, not divine design. Therefore, an atheist, armed with nothing but a biological understanding of empathy, can be a perfectly good person without any need for divine oversight.
I entirely agree that an atheist can be a profoundly good, deeply ethical person. The Islamic framework does not dispute this for a second. In fact, it explains it through a specific concept called fitra.
Fitra? What does that translate to?
It roughly translates to the innate, natural human inclination toward truth, justice, and goodness that exists within every single human being. It's a hardwired moral compass. Why is it there? Because, as the Quran states in Surah Al-Sajdah, chapter 32, the Creator fashioned humanity and breathed into him of his soul.
So you're saying my empathy is actually just leftover divine programming?
Yes. Even if a person intellectually denies God with their tongue, their soul still recognizes and gravitates toward justice and compassion because of that divine imprint. But you are missing the deeper philosophical issue with your evolutionary biology argument.
Which is?
The problem isn't whether an atheist can act out goodness. The problem is that without God, there is no objective basis for morality whatsoever. If humans are merely complex biological accidents driven by evolutionary imperatives, then a human being committing a violent crime is functionally no different than a predator eating its prey in the wild.
I disagree entirely. It's vastly different because we are conscious creatures capable of suffering.
But if we're just matter in motion, suffering is just a neurological chemical reaction. It's all just nature. Yet you look at the suffering in the world and you feel profound moral outrage. You call the pain of an earthquake or a war wrong. Where does that objective, universal standard of wrong come from if we are just stardust trying to survive?
from our shared consciousness.
But that's subjective. You are actually borrowing the Creator's objective moral framework to express your outrage against him. Without an objective standard, an earthquake isn't a tragedy. It's just a geographical reshuffling of carbon atoms.
I don't need a cosmic rulebook to know that a child starving is objectively bad for the well-being of conscious creatures. We can measure suffering. We don't need a deity to tell us pain hurts. But let's follow your framework for a moment and look at the administration of this supposed divine justice you keep bringing up.
Okay, let's look at the administration of it.
If the entire point of this earthly existence is a test, and belief in ultimate justice are the goals, why is God so incredibly silent? Why the secrecy?
You mean the lack of immediate, visible intervention?
Exactly. If you want people to pass a test, you make the criteria and the consequences abundantly clear and immediate. Why not administer justice in the here and now? Why does a brutal dictator get to live a life of absolute luxury, oppress millions, die peacefully in his sleep at age 90, and we are told to simply trust that justice will happen in some unseen afterlife?
Because immediate justice alters the nature of the test.
Relying on the afterlife for ultimate justice feels exactly like a check in the mail. It's a promise of future payment that might never actually arrive. It serves only to pacify people, to keep them quiet while terrible injustices occur right in front of us.
I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, because you are asking for a system that would completely obliterate the very concept of the test we established earlier. Imagine a world with instantaneous, visible divine justice.
It sounds like a much fairer world to me.
Let's play it out. Every time a person tells a lie, they are immediately struck by a bolt of lightning from a clear sky. Every time someone steals, their hand miraculously becomes paralyzed on the spot. What would happen?
Crime would drop to zero overnight.
Yes, but at what cost? Every single human being on Earth would be perfectly obedient, but they wouldn't be obedient out of a genuine recognition of truth, or out of sincere faith, or out of a love for goodness. They would be obedient purely out of absolute, immediate, physical terror.
So God prefers voluntary belief over preventing actual suffering?
The silence or the delay of justice that you critique is actually the necessary space provided for free will to truly operate. It allows human beings to reveal their actual character without a metaphorical cosmic gun to their heads.
But while that space is being provided for the dictator to show his true character, millions of innocent people are being crushed under his boot. That space is paid for in blood.
And that is exactly why the Day of Judgment is not a pacifier, as you called it. It is the ultimate necessary equalizer. Think of the worst atrocities in human history. Think of monsters like Hitler or Nero. If there's no Day of Judgment, then Hitler and the millions of innocent people he slaughtered ultimately share the exact same fate.
Which is nothingness.
Yes. They just end. They return to the dirt. The oppressor and the oppressed get the exact same cosmic outcome. That is the ultimate, absurd injustice. The Islamic framework guarantees that this is not the case. Surah Al-Zalzala, chapter 99 of the Quran, ensures this with absolute precision.
What is a guarantee?
It states that on that day, whoever does an atom's weight of good will see it, and whoever does an atom's weight of evil will see it. Nothing escapes the scale. The dictator who died in his sleep does not escape. The child who suffered unjustly is compensated infinitely.
But as we draw this down, I have to summarize my stance by reiterating that relying on an unseen, delayed justice fundamentally feels like an enormous gamble.
A gamble?
Absolutely. You are asking humanity to endure staggering levels of pain, unexplainable natural disasters, and systemic cruelty, all on the promise that a hidden designer will eventually balance the scales in a realm we cannot perceive, using logic we are told we are too limited to understand. It demands an extraordinary leap of faith over a mountain of empirical, tangible suffering.
It demands trust in the signs we do see, to believe in the wisdom we don't see.
But I must pose a final, lingering question regarding the fragility of this entire belief system. What if you are wrong? What if all the theological frameworks, the verses you've cited, the concepts of infinite wisdom and cosmic tests are simply complex human coping mechanisms? What if it's all just a way for our brains to deal with an indifferent, cold universe? What if there is simply nothing at the end of all this suffering?
That is the ultimate existential wager, and I will address it directly to summarize my defense. If I am wrong, and the atheistic, materialist worldview is correct, what is the consequence for me?
You've lived your life believing in illusion.
But practically, I will have lived a life structured by discipline, by regular daily prayer, by mandated charity to the poor, and by a constant internal striving for patience and moral clarity. And when I die, I simply cease to exist, exactly as you do. The dirt claims us both. I lose absolutely nothing.
And the flip side of that wager?
If you are wrong and you meet the Creator whom you dismissed despite the magnificent complexity of the universe and the undeniable moral compass within your own consciousness, then the loss is entirely infinite.
A classic variation of Pascal's wager?
Perhaps, but the Quran speaks directly to this empirical evidence in Surah Fussilat, chapter 41, promising that the Creator will show humanity His signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes clear to them that it is the truth. However, I must clarify something crucial.
Go ahead.
For the believer, this is not merely a calculated bet or a cold risk assessment. It is a profound conviction drawn from observing the deliberate design of the cosmos and experiencing an unshakable inner peace. The suffering of the world is real, and it is remarkably heavy, but we view it as a temporary shadow cast by the brilliant light of an eternal purpose.
This highlights the persistent, perhaps unbridgeable tension we've been circling all day. There is a massive friction between the visceral, immediate reality of human suffering that we see every single day and the complex intellectual framework of infinite divine wisdom that you propose.
It is a friction that defines the human experience.
Exactly. And examining these existential questions from both an empirical, skeptical viewpoint and a deeply structured theological one is crucial. I think there remains so much more to explore within this philosophical intersection.
I couldn't agree more. The value of this discourse is found in exactly this tension. We have laid out two fundamentally different ways of understanding the human condition, the nature of morality, and the universe we inhabit. There is profound depth in this material that warrants continuous, rigorous reflection. We will leave it to the listener to weigh the evidence, the analogies, and the reasoning presented here today. Thank you for joining us.